Grassroots Citizen Panel. And join me in studio, couple folks, as they did previously. One is Denise Gitcham. Denise is PR expert, founder of and president of 7 Second Strategies, and the former National Director of Hispanic Outreach for President George W. Bush. Good to see you again, Denise.
Thanks for having me back.
Seated next to Denise is Patty Newman, healthcare expert, private medicine advocate, and you manage a family-run medical center here in Southern California.
Yes.
I had to choose my words carefully there, you've told me, because there's some regulation. If I said it the wrong way, we'd all be in trouble.
Right, we would.
But
yeah. Only
you
doctors can own practices. So
you'd be in trouble more than me, so I didn't care that much about it. All right. Sitting in studio with us on our Grassroots Citizen Panel, as he did previously, is Chris Street. Chris is a professor, he's a columnist, and a national security expert. Good to see you, Chris. And we'll be speaking next month, where?
From Ho Chi Minh University, Rick. All right. On strategy for capitalism in Vietnam.
Well, I'll tell you what, we could use some strategy on capitalism here in America. I don't know where the segue is there, but I'll find one somewhere. President Obama, he flip-flops. I hope he wears flip-flops because he is a flip-flop. He flip-flops on the boots, back on the ground in Baghdad. Start with Denise Gitcham. President Obama says we are not going to send soldiers to Baghdad. We are sending 275 soldiers to Baghdad, this time to rescue Americans, for lack of a better word, out of the embassy in Baghdad. Sounds like a lot of like the fall of Saigon to me, Chris Street. How bad is it, Denise Gitcham, when we have to ask Iran for help?
You know, there's some realpolitik going on, really. Senator Graham said, why did we deal with Stalin? Because he wasn't worse than Hitler. And I think that there's a real story there, which is that you really, sometimes politics and war make for strange bedfellows. I think it's better to be pragmatic than to ultimately lose American lives. And as for the 270 troops being sent in, I believe that they're special forces, which really is a sort of a different sort of a force than we might imagine as a big sort of rolling, you know, infantry unit.
Yeah. All right. So you don't see it as a real flip-flop here, because we had to get those Americans out of there anyway, or we have to. We should.
Far be it from me to support Obama sort of policy on this, but I don't see it as a flip-flop.
But you like, if I read between the lines here, you're saying you like the idea of working with Iran.
I do not like anything about Iran, to set the record straight. What I do think is that you have to do what's necessary when dire circumstances require it, and this is certainly a dire circumstance.
Yeah, and I will say this, Patty Newman, what concerns me about Iran is that they, you use the Stalin example. That's a good example. Iran has a different version of what the right thing is than what America has. The Iranian government has come out and says, we want to do the right thing in Iraq. Well, it's different from what we define as right.
Exactly.
Problem with us going in there and working with as Iran as a strategic partner, as you see?
I think so. Number one, about the troops that are being sent there, I don't think it has anything to do with rescuing people that are working for the embassy. I heard an interesting theory this morning that it's more likely, I mean, if you send 200 guys or 170 guys to the embassy itself, this humongous 80 football field size embassy in Iraq, worth $1 billion. It's either a suicide mission, or they're not going there for that. They're going there to dismantle it, to take as much stuff as they can out of there before the Sunnis come and attack it. Yeah. I think that's what it is. Now, as far as, the Sunnis and the Shiites, both the Shiites, the Iranian part of it, and the Sunnis are the ISIS guys that are brutal, so brutal that Al-Qaeda says, don't hook me up with those guys.
Right.
These guys have an agenda, and their agenda is religious, and the battle they want to create is a civil war between the two groups. Have this Muhammad prophecy come through, and for the Shiites is okay, so then the Mahdi will return, or this is.
I would like to see Nancy Pelosi get in a fight with them instead of the Archbishop in San Francisco.
There you go.
All right, now Chris Street, you being the national security expert here, let me ask you this. Patty Newman brought up something interesting. She brought up the Sunnis. It would seem to me, maybe I'm oversimplifying this, it would seem to me that if the Iraqi president, Maliki, had he listened to the Obama administration when they advised him to bring in Sunni tribal members into the political fold in Iraq, and he refused to take their advice, maybe this could have been avoided, because what happened is those Sunni citizens in Iraq, when ISIS came in with their weapons, they stepped aside and said, have at it, guys. Is that could that?
Well, they didn't step aside, Rick. They stepped right into it. Remember that this country is 40% Sunni, and the first thing that Obama said is, "I'm leaving Iraq." When he came into office. By 2011, we were out of Iraq. And of course, 3 years later, exactly like Vietnam, you're now in a situation where the whole thing is falling apart.
Yeah.
More important, those 275 that are going there, these are Marines. These are combat Marines for security. Remember, this is a 5,500-person embassy. About 3,000 are CIA. You've got all kinds of bagmen, you've got all kinds of black ops, you've got tons of special forces guys that have gone in the last 2 weeks. So this is all-out defense in a collapsing environment. We are dealing with a change in the Middle East that's going to really keep the fires lit for at least the next 20 years.
You believe that Iraq, as you said earlier in the show, is split into two entities?
It's done.
Yeah, wow.
2 or 3.
And so what happens to this compound we have there, this embassy that's...
Well, for somebody who's been in the military, I want to tell you, 275 Marines are your worst nightmare. These guys know how to rock and roll, how to play it tough. I was in the Army, and, the Marines always like to say, the Army go until it gets tough, then they call the Marines, and we didn't like that. But I was in a couple situations where we called the Marines.
Right.
So, 275 combat Marines in an expedition force are some serious firepower, and they're, of course, enhancing. I believe it's 325 already there. So you've got a very strong combat element to slow down any...
But this is the fall of Baghdad, like the fall of Saigon.
I don't know if it's going to fall, but it's got all of the elements to be a fall. The only thing that will save it is having Iran come in. And remember, I'm going to be teaching at Ho Chi Minh University to people who tried to kill me.
That's amazing, yeah.
So, sometimes your enemy creates different kinds of friends. And Iran used to be our best ally in the Middle East, and Jimmy Carter screwed that all up when he invited, the religious leaders to come back in, because it was our, democratic right.
It was a different Iran. They also the best Hamas, let's face it. All right, that was a joke. Okay. Everyone's like, yeah? All right, we come back, we'll talk about the illegal immigration flowing over the borders. We're seeing ISIS flow through Iraq. What about the illegal immigration flowing over the U.S. borders? It's becoming a major problem as well. We'll continue with our grassroots system panel with more right after this. Welcome back, everybody. If you're new to watching the Rick Amato Show here on the One America News Network, like I said a little bit earlier, I want to welcome you and thank you for taking the time to check us out. But I also want to hear from you to let me know what's on your mind, good, bad, or indifferent. You can email me directly, rickamato@oann.com. I answer all email personally. It might take a week or two to get there, but we get there. And follow me on Twitter @Amato Talk and on Facebook @Rick Amato and/or The Rick Amato Show. All right, we're in our grassroots citizen panel. And so we know that one of the headlines, of course, this last couple of weeks is that just this overrun of illegal immigrants over the U.S. border. It's being estimated at 60,000, 60 and 3 more zeros, illegal immigrant children will cross that border this year. The figure was only 6,000 3 years ago, a tenfold increase. Now, I personally, as I said in the show yesterday, I understand if that mother, that father, those parents, if they're in a dire situation, I understand someone who might want to risk breaking a law to get their child and their life into a better situation. I'm not advocating it, but I understand that. And that is what the White House, that is what CNN and others are painting as the broad picture of what's happening. But it's more than that. There are violent kids, violent adults, gangs coming over across that border. It is not just the innocent as we laid out. Let's start with Patty Newman here. Patty, you are of Mexican descent.
Right.
Your parents were both Mexican nationals.
Right.
You were born here as a non-anchor baby.
Right. I was accidentally born here. I was a couple weeks early. I was supposed to be born in Mexicali, and then they finished their education, took me back to Mexico, lived there till I was 21 years of age, and then came back to the States.
What is your take on it? Well, first of all, why do you suppose the tenfold increase? 6,000 illegal immigrant children 3 years ago, 60,000 estimated now.
I think it's being promoted by this administration. I don't think it's an accident that these kids are, these families are sending their kids. Yes, you're right. They're in dire straits over there. They have no jobs, they have no food, they're poor. I understand that, but it's a disservice to make such an announcement and then risk the lives of all these kids. I personally blame Obama for all the lives that are being lost on their way over as they get on these trains. They just climb on top of the trains. They go through the whole, the country of Mexico. And in between, they're kidnapped, they're raped, they're made to become gangsters. A lot of the kids, there's gangs that go to them and try to get phone numbers that they have for people that they're gonna come and meet here in the States, and then they use them. And these are people in the government, the immigration services in Mexico, that then use that phone number, call up here to get money.
Yeah, blackmail.
Right.
Ransom. Denise Gitsham, you were the former director of National Hispanic Outreach during the George W. Bush White House years. You're taking all this.
So I've definitely fallen on the side of Jeb Bush and George Bush with respect to, advocating that family values don't stop at the Rio Grande. But what you've seen here is a national security issue in addition to a humanitarian crisis. And what I've noticed, what I actually read about just recently, was that the ACLU and 4 immigrant right groups actually filed a complaint against the government on behalf of a number of the children, describing lack of adequate medical care, ice-cold holding cells with bright fluorescent lights on that prevented them from sleeping, and that they were being held by the Border Patrol for more than the statutory limit of 72 hours. Now, it's one thing to try to make an effort to go into a country and hope that you get to stay. In fact, from what I understand, a lot of these families are running to the Border Patrol, not away from them, because they want to be caught, because they understand that the law enables them to be taken under the custody of HHS and to stay. But when you have folks on the left, the far left, I would caveat that, but still the left, advocating for better conditions for people who are abusing the system, kind of changes the equation.
Do you agree with Patty Newman that the reason we've seen this tenfold increase is because the Obama administration has sent a signal that, come on up.
From what I've read, that's true. And also there's obviously a lack of diplomacy that has gone on. There's not been sort of the groundwork that was necessary to put in place with the countries where you're seeing these folks come from before you instituted those types of policies. And I think that would have been a necessary prerequisite.
Chris Street, you say that, listen, these aren't just all well-meaning folks that have a difficult life back in Honduras, wherever they happen to be.
That's right.
There's some tough, menacing characters out there.
Well, let's just talk about what really happened in 2010 in Texas. There was such disagreement among county sheriffs on who was to be arrested, how you were going to handle them, how you were going to communicate. They hired an organization called the American Land Forces Institute, a military support organization that went in and worked with all the data and found out of the 30,000 arrested, 875 were from Middle East countries, most of which appeared to be sneaking into the U.S. to set up cells. This is data that's available, and this was 2010. Remember, Rick, that in the national security document produced in 2012, Barack Obama's administration said that 6,000 children coming in the country would rise to about 60,000 in 2013 and would rise to about 150,000 by 2015. As far as I'm concerned, this is absolutely on plan. There should be no surprises. It was in the documents.
All right. Well, that's a great point that I don't hear brought out much in the mainstream media, that this had been forecasted a few years ago. We could spend a lot more time on this. Go ahead, Patty.
A quick thing that I think, you bring up the disservice and the compassionate side of this. I think it's a bigger disservice to not send these people back so that they can go and repair their country. Because for as long as we let them in and we do this fake kind of compassion, things are not going to get better.
All right, well, that's an interesting point. I don't know how they can go back and repair the country if you're a mother with a couple kids, but that's another. We'll get into that next time here in the near future. Let's shift gears in our remaining moment. I know it's a big story to Denise Gitsham right here. So Leonardo DiCaprio has been invited to Washington.
My story, I love that.
Has been invited to Washington to speak with John Kerry on how to clean up the world's oceans. Let's be more environmentally friendly. Let's have more regulation. Meanwhile, the Hollywood superstar is living it up on the world's fifth largest super yacht off the coast of Rio de Janeiro.
Because he can.
Watching the World Cup. Any comment on this?
You know, what I don't understand is why the State Department is anywhere near this when we already have NOAA and the EPA that can do a well, I won't say a perfectly fine job of regulating, but certainly that's their jurisdiction. So it just completely baffles me that Secretary Kerry is anywhere near a star, other than to hope that some of his star celebrity, you know, good looks or something is going to rub off on Secretary, but it hasn't happened yet. I don't expect it to. It just completely makes no sense.
Yeah, it's crazy. They look like
desperate. They're desperate. They're desperate for something good to be associated with. There you go. Maybe that's what they think Leo is.
I was going to say cartoon characters, but desperate works for me.
Okay.
All right, we're out of time. I want to thank our grassroots citizen panel members, Chris Street, columnist, professor, national security expert, speaking in
Ho Chi Minh University in the old Saigon in July 15th.
That's pretty fascinating. We're looking forward to have you on from Vietnam when you're out there. Patty Newman, healthcare expert and private medicine advocate, and PR expert needs Gitcham. Thanks for being part of our grassroots citizen panel.
Thanks for having us.
Excuse me. I want to thank you, our viewers, for watching. We're right back at you again tomorrow night, 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. And now I leave you with our Amato Mio moment of the day. Thanks to the editing team at The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, NBC's Brian Williams is no longer just an anchorman.